All right, welcome back, everybody. It is Friday, the 7th. And we are going to pick up on S100, which is, we're gonna put aside any further work on S103 for a few days till we get through S100. Ron gave me something Friday.
Yeah.
Or maybe I can open my computer. Thank you. So we have Josh Hanford and Sean Gilpin. We're expected to hear from Boer Yang later today, and then we're also going to hear, I think, from Rachel Seelig from Vermont Legal Aid. There's two elements that we've talked about in this committee, and I just want to let you know. I think we're going to hear from Rachel. I want to talk to Rachel about possibly trying to get some language together to add to S100 that would have a pilot program for full representation of attorneys for tenants. We heard from Judge Tour how successful a program was when it came to the rent escrow process. And we heard ideas from folks that, from Judge Tour that, or from Judge Zone that in other jurisdictions, in other states, having full representation has proven pretty successful and has helped the eviction process, speed up or be resolved relatively quickly. And so I'm going to ask when Rachel comes in today, I want to talk about the concept, but I also want to ask to see if she can provide us with at least language or a structure that would work for a pilot program, and then I'm going to work with legislative counsel, that'd be David Hall, to perhaps, if we get a structure that we can work with, to provide an amendment to S100 that we can discuss next week. I also want to, the reason, well, people asked, and for the section by section on S100, from what passed the committee, and that has all those financial numbers and programs in housing that are not in the final bill. And so we're going to consider those as well, of putting that policy language back in. So things like the rental arrears program, I don't know, I forget what the rental rescue, I think is what they called it, where there was a $2.5 million ask that passed the committee, not the Senate, passed the committee in the Senate. Which is a number that we've heard from VSHA that it would be a reasonable number based on the work that they've done in the past with legal aid. I've asked VSHA to see if there was a way. Now, we had two different programs when it came to the rental rescue programs or the rental subsidy programs that were run through VSHA. One was, the current one that's running out is called VRAP. So it's the Vermont ERAP, which was the money that was sent to us in December of 2020. And those monies were a lot different than the first slug of money. So the coronavirus relief funds or the CARES Act, the program that was set up to help landlords and tenants with back rent it really was very, very successful because it gave access to the process and to the money on a very equal basis between landlords and tenants. And we were very happy with the way that program worked. VRAP put different strings and made it more complicated especially for landlords to get involved. And so I'm going to ask Kathleen Burke to provide us with a framework to see if, and we will consider this as part of our eviction diversion conversation, like rather than forming a whole new eviction diversion program, can we just start it with making sure that we have if we have to use state money, can we use the state money to create a program that reflects what happened with the CRF money, which was equal access and proved very successful in taking care of many evictions or potential evictions. And so those are the two things I'm asking those folks to bring back for next Tuesday. because then we will shape, we'll shape what's going on with S100 after we hear more from other folks. So, yes, Representative Elder.
Yeah, that's a helpful overview. And it's nice to have the section by section of what passed House Economic Development and Housing. I do think I'm glad we're having the conversation about eviction diversion. I know that at a certain point, S100 is we're going to get into like hurry up and get it out of committee mode. And I want to have enough time to really dig into some of the, for example, this sounds like a tangent, but it's not totally a tangent. We got some communication from the Reverend Mark Hughes today about some of the social equity considerations that they want in this. I feel like some of those considerations are pretty part and parcel with some of the zoning exemption work that was done in Senator Rom Hinsdale's committee. And I just want to have sufficient time, though I know it's not our traditional policy area, to kind of try to have that conversation, say, what are some of the regulatory things that may align with what Reverend Hughes is asking for, that may align with some of the other testimony, the needs that we heard about in testimony in relation to development. So I'll leave it at that, but just to say, I'm all for adding things on. I just don't want to put too much effort up front on adding new pieces and kind of putting money language back in, that when we get to the end, we have a tendency to say, well, we're just not going to touch any of the zoning stuff because it's got to go down the hall because, as I said yesterday, I think we do have a unique role to play as it relates to some of those zoning conversations. So sorry to belabor that, but I do just want to say that I want our committee to have that time, I hope. And I know how these things can get crunched at the end.
Well, it will get crunched, but I appreciate that. I always hold out. It is, while we can't directly work on it, we can't directly take the time it takes to learn the zoning nuances as it would be if we were in the other committee. We do have a responsibility to ourselves and to our own work to make the understandings, to have the understandings of the interconnectedness. I don't ever want anybody to say, well, this is zoning, that's not what we're dealing with. I mean, there's our work on housing and zoning has really ramped up over the last several years to really see how connected they are. And so I totally agree that, yes, it would be nice to have a 26-hour day at some point where we could stop the clock on other things. But that said, it just really points out about how busy next week is going to be and how focused we have to be next week on the work. So, but I appreciate the concerns and
yeah. And I hope when we get some new amended language that it'd be good to understand what the options will be if there's other language that we want to consider.
Right. And so we're going to, be able to invite people to be in the room, whether it's through Zoom or whether it's through, there's a time and a place for having witnesses come and talk about what we'll talk about today, but then also to have people when we start doing that walkthrough of the language that we're presenting as potential amendments, of having people here to help craft it. So yeah, I'm just side by side with you. I guess is all I'm saying. Is that
I would add my voice to agree.
Yep. So with that, thank you. Josh, would you like to join us? And Sean, I guess, if you'd like to join us. And so, and Bor, if you're there, we will get to you after these folks. So just be prepared whenever. But yeah. So Josh, welcome back. We have taken, I guess we're beyond preliminary testimony, but again, as you've heard, we have very little time to work with S100. I know that you've been involved. You've been a lead on working with the Senate on this bill. We do have an understanding. We did walk through the zoning in Act 250 materials, and as you heard, we do have an understanding of the interconnectedness of one policy and another. But what we have in front of us, at least for housing, this is a lot of material that's in as passed, but not as passed the Senate. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, we had specific thoughts. We had a question about changes to the VHIP program, and what DHCD is looking at in terms of, in terms of what's in this bill and what we can do to make it better.
Excellent. Well, for the record, Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Housing and Community Development, and Sean Gilpin, Director of Housing Division, is joining. And when we get to some specific VHIP changes, I'm definitely going to have Sean go over those in detail. But I appreciate you having me here to talk more about S100. Appreciate the comments that have already been raised. There's so much in S100 that we could talk about, and have been at the table since the beginning, really compromising on behalf of the governor with the various partners to get the bill where it is. And so there's lots of elements to this bill that I'd love to talk to you about. Any questions you have, please have me on speed dial. One thing I will comment high level is I know there's a tension between the jurisdiction of land use and housing. I think everyone could sort of recognize, though, that you don't build housing in the clouds. It's built on the land, and it's vital that there's shared jurisdiction in this space at all aspects, because one does not happen without the other. And I know that typically we look at sort of some of the land use and they end up in the environmental committees, and the sort of goal of development versus conservation is much different than a committee that is looking out for the human right of shelter and housing for folks. So I would definitely ask you to insert as much of your authority in this space as possible, because I don't know how you build housing without land use regulations as part of it. On the higher level, other elements, there's a lot of great programs in here, some of which the governor has in his budget, some of which he doesn't. There is one program I'll just touch on real quickly because it's not something that had a lot of attention, I don't think. There's a $500,000 appropriation that the Senate intended to be base funding to continue the mobile home repair program that we just started, the MER program. Manufactured Housing Improvement Repair Program. It's $4 million. We've already launched that program in a partnership with CVOEO and the Vermont State Housing Authority. And there was 3 different elements of that program. There was small home repair grants to the actual homeowners that are low income in mobile home parks, an infrastructure, and a foundation lot repair. And money was broken out amongst the 3 areas. Well, let's just say a grant, the home repair grants have been so successful in less than a month that we've opened it, we're already out of money. We've already had over $1.5 million in requests. We only had $750,000 in that program. We were able to approve 2 emergency repairs of 2 seniors, very low income, without heat within 4 hours with that program. So we're probably going to distribute, I think our other partners are going to distribute a 1-page memo that should allow us the flexibility to redistribute the money within that program and through some budget proposal this year. Otherwise, we're going to be saying no to the largest and most impactful and the most desired part of that program because it was so spelled out. We don't have any flexibility. I think that's a lesson across the board that we've learned through these pandemic programs is if the flexibility isn't granted to serve what comes up, we're stuck in the tracks. And, I would say another element, not that we're really prepared to address, but I've heard with VHIP testimony. I've talked to the commissioner of Dale and others about the desire for VHIP to maybe serve folks through sort of the shared home experience for folks with disabilities. Well, the underlying statute of how VHIP is built from the very underlying statute is a landlord-tenant relationship. So that'll be very challenging to unwind and debate this session. I'm very interested in speaking and figuring out how we can make that work. I have some notes and some things, because this program was designed with underlying statute that's so specific and it's meant for a landlord-tenant relationship. We don't have the flexibility in this program to respond to emerging housing needs and I maybe see VHCB partner in the room. They do have some underlying statute that allows for flexibility and emergent housing needs that could maybe be more responsive because the legislation, how VHIP's designed, clearly would not allow for that relationship as it is. You'd have to unwind. We'd have to talk to our partners about whether they could run a program differently. But I know on the disability front and access, universal access, ADA access, I know folks have asked about that. And I do think there's a way that VHIP can help with making apartments more accessible with VHIP through an incentive. Essentially, landlords, if they want to make their unit that receiving VHIP funding from ADA compliant, universal access, universal visitation, you could do that by adding an incentive. I don't know what the number is. You're up to $10,000 additional grant with no match required to encourage them to do that without having to really change the foundational statute of VHIP. So it would be, hey, it's a good thing to maybe make your apartments more accessible. You're not required by law, but if you want to do that, we would support that. And here's some additional funding that maybe comes with no match so that you will be more likely to do that. That would be something we'd be interested in discussing. It's something the committee wants to respond and tweak VHIP in that way this session that I think we could figure out. So to the VHIP changes in general that came over from the Senate, they fall in a couple particular areas. They all make sense. They were influenced by our thoughts, the 5 homeownership centers that actually run this program with landlords. They were supported by them, and there was debate in the Senate that they're pretty high level. I'll go high level, and then Sean can dive into any detailed questions you have. One of them is just making it more understandable the difference between an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, a new unit, and a regular repaired unit. It sort of makes that all follow the same rules. You're either coming in for the funding and you're committing to a 5-year period because you're serving folks exiting homelessness, or you're serving the refugee resettlement community, or you're choosing to do a 10-year affordability commitment at HUD fair market rents. And it doesn't matter if you're doing an ADU, a new unit creation, or a repaired unit. So that's an overlying technical fix that makes it easier for people to understand, that we all support is a good thing to change and modernize in VHIP. The other area, which is significant, but we've heard loud and clear from our partners and others that we should have had this from the beginning, was if you have an occupied unit, but it doesn't meet code, it's unsafe, someone shouldn't be living there, and they're forced to either be evicted because of a code violation or deal with unsafe housing conditions, you can't use VHIP to fix that. And so a landlord is either going to keep violating the law and renting to someone, or they'll be shut down by fire marshals and say you have to evict folks. Either way, who loses? The tenant, the low-income resident. So this change would allow an occupied VHIP unit that doesn't meet code to be eligible, an occupied unit serving a low-income tenant to use VHIP to repair and protect any displacement and all the conditions would they kept in place to ensure the rent's affordable. Because now the situation is often, someone's going to be evicted. The landlord's going to put a bunch of money into that apartment, and now the rents are going to go up, and either way, the tenant's displaced. So that's a change that we were able to do with CRF money before VHIP was even a thing, and it kept a lot of people from being homeless. We were able to operate the program the first year of COVID with an authorization of an appropriation, and we allowed this to be used. But as soon as it was codified into a program, this wasn't allowed because it was about getting new units online that were offline. And we've got this 90-day vacancy requirement in existing VHIP. So it removes that 90-day vacancy requirement and allows us to serve a unit where someone has is unsafe, doesn't meet code, but protects that tenant from being displaced and their rents being raised on them. So that's another significant piece. And one more, and then we can get into questions. The other one is that other changes allows VHIP for new unit creation of up to 5 units. So it could be in a multifamily building. It could be a new unit on a property that they build a fresh new apartment, an ADU offsite. It just sort of codifies what was happening and difficult for our partners to understand. Well, if you're building an ADU and it's net new, it's allowed. But if you're building a new apartment, it's not allowed. So if you have an existing 2-unit large home, 2-unit apartment that's in a large home, but you could really make a third, is that allowed? Is that not allowed? So this allows VHIP up to 5 units, no more, because we didn't want this to be used for 100-unit developments of new unit creation. So those are the 3 significant changes that Sean has the details and can describe in much more detail, clarifications, questions, where this all came from. But I wanted to throw that out, and happy to talk about anything in S100, but I understood that it was the VHIP post pieces you were most interested in.
Right, so there's a couple of pieces of the proposed changes that I need your help to make me feel better about.
Yep.
One of the questions I received a couple years ago was, it fits in between 2 of these changes that we're talking about, is why are we, it was from someone who had an apartment whose apartment was in code but needed to be updated. So
that wouldn't be eligible unless it was.
Right, and it's never been eligible because we were trying to take damaged units and make them undamaged. And we've heard anywhere between 4 and 19,000 apartments are unoccupied or maybe non-code compliant or what have you. I mean, whatever the number may be. So they had a point. Why are we incenting, if there's a landlord who is renting an apartment that is out of code, we could consider them as not a fabulous landlord, a property owner. Why are we incenting them? And become more of a philosophical. I mean, I get why, but why doesn't the program help people who are trying to make decent apartments better and still want to adhere to I'm trying to put a family that's experiencing homelessness into an apartment, or I'm trying to offer an affordable apartment that, follow along with the 5-10 year needs.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick opinion, and Sean's probably has a more detailed example. I would think that it would be a hard stretch for me to support public funding going into an apartment just to make it a little bit nicer, rehab it. So then you could, make more profitable for you with state money, as opposed to a unit that could be shut down and someone's living in an unsafe housing environment. One could argue, well, they're a bad landlord. Maybe they also had lost rent for several months. Maybe they don't have the financing. Either way, the tenant that's living in an unsafe, non-code compliant unit is much more disadvantaged than one that doesn't have fresh carpet and a paint. And that really is a maintenance issue for that landlord. Much in the same way as I've seen many of our public investments in multifamily buildings, like one in downtown Burlington, that they had a sewer pipe explode in the building and it was going to displace everyone. That was owned by CHT. They were technically non-code compliant units. Well, we had public resources to fix it for them, so no one was displaced. The private landlords, when they run into these expensive repairs, have 2 choices. Borrow the money, maybe they have equity, maybe they're wealthy and then they can fix it and it's all fine, or not address it, or raise the rents on folks. And maybe they can't raise the rents on folks until they evict them and get new tenants. So I think that the answer to that is we're just trying to be reasonable with public funds, that if it's just a simple maintenance and making it a little bit nicer, well, that should really come out of your budget, your rent, your profits. But if this place is so bad that you should be shut down and no one should be living there, the public consequences of that are significant to both parties. And so we have a duty to sort of do something, make something happen. And if we just had code enforcement and shut everyone down, we're going to pay for it in the homeless shelter. We're going to pay for it in the motel program and the public consequences. It's much cheaper to fix the problem at the root of an unsafe housing with further conditions, that people are paying that public investment. And
and I think that's what I wanted you to take that one more step and say the further conditions are based on an application for this money. No one can walk up to a teller's window and take $50,000 out to do this. That the application process is still existing through your partners, which in this case are going to be nonprofit housing agencies.
There's a covenant placed on for any subsequent owner, so they can't just take this money, make their apartment more valuable, and then walk away. When they sell it, the next owner has the 9 more years of compliance or X number, and we process those every week. Because people sell real estate, and we have these covenants. They go through our office. We sign off on them. They're recorded. But yeah.
And I think I'll say this for Sean too, because Sean, I have 2 questions. One is, what happens if somebody sells their property that they have received state money for? And also, is the prohibition of using this as a short-term rental lifelong, or is it just for the extent of the time that they're in the program? Because that's unclear in that prohibition language. Representative Elder had a question.
Yeah, just kind of pushing back a little with the notion that a landlord with something out of code compliance, they haven't necessarily done anything wrong, just because we have to remember that code changes over time, and they might not have been renting it for all time. Also, if you own a house and somebody lives in it and they're not renting it, none of these code issues really apply. You just live in your house and do what you want. And then, so if somebody has, say, purchased a property that was in the single family residential market without a rental, there may be a lot of stuff to catch up on. There may be 20 years of code. And so, I think we have to keep that in mind, that it's not, yes, you could probably map some overlap between landlords who are, chronically underfunding apartments and not maintaining stuff, but you're also going to have a lot of individuals who are just, through no fault of their own, facing these sort of, and it is keeping people potentially, because the other option is, again, sell it back to the private market, have somebody move in for their primary home, all these issues go away. So it is a program that seems to me to be a little targeted at renters and to keeping affordable rental units, because we know that these properties could probably just be sold, right now in the market, but not by someone who's going to then provide a long-term rental.
No, but I think the next step, though, where I said this question now has become the middle and not the end, the bookend, is if we allow this program to help subsidize new units. If I want to turn, again, I have a single family house that used to be an apartment upstairs, a couple changes of this, that, and the other thing, and I could have an apartment upstairs for minimal investment, whatever. If you're talking about new construction, it's a philosophical thing. We'll talk about it in terms of, I get your points and they're well taken. I just want to make sure we think those things through when we talk about this in the next few days.
Yeah, and there was a big debate in Senate Economic Development and Housing General Affairs. Not a tense debate, but just, the new, that wasn't, Senator Clarkson was one of the original sort of folks designing this with Senator Scirocco. And it was like, well, that wasn't the intent to build new. It was to take the existing. And it's like, everyone sort of came around to the fact, if someone can turn a new housing residence that's going to serve low-income people for less than $50,000, why in the world wouldn't we support that when it costs $500,000 to build something new? There's not endless opportunities for this to actually work. There's some that make sense. And by capping it at 5, it's not becoming the primary motivation for anyone to, build units using just this condition. But maybe someone's going to build a 10-unit market rate property, and they're going to use a little bit of up to $50,000 from this program to ensure that at least 5 of those are going to serve low-income people. That's a pretty good sort of leverage point to get at the housing we need built. And so that was their trying to summarize sort of their rationale by being like, yes, we definitely want to see that happen. There was some fear that the primary, we won't really serve we might get away from bringing back online the vacant and abandoned units. And I don't think so, because those are the ones that can work for less than $50,000. There's already an apartment, it's been vacant, has these problems. It's pretty hard to build a whole new bathroom and a heat system and all that off of $50,000 or less. So it still works 90% of the time the best in those situations where an existing unit has been offline, is not in code, it's vacant, it still works the best in that scenario. And, maybe Sean, anything to add to this discussion about how we arrived at?
Sure. I think so. These are all really great points. I appreciate it all being brought up. And yes, originally, during the CARES Act, I not dissimilar from the rental assistance that Chair Stevens had mentioned at the beginning. We stood this program up with CARES Act funding before we had ARPA, and it was a little different. We did allow for anti-displacement rehabilitation. The program was originally connected to a proposal that did pass that connected the Division of Fire Safety, bolstered their jurisdiction over rental housing safety. And the idea was originally for VHIP to be a resource for people who might have not even realized that there were code violations until they had a regional fire marshal in the unit, and might find themselves unable to address the need. I think I would point out that we work this program through the 5 homeownership centers, and they are all regionally based. They cover every county in the state. Part of the reason for that was not only because they are logistically have a lot more capacity and expertise in actually doing the on the ground oversight of these type of projects, but they also have an intimate relationship with their communities. And so we gave them intentionally a pretty significant discretion about competitiveness of these applications. It is a competitive program. It's not first come, first serve. The homeownership centers, we call them HOCs. The HOCs have the authority to approve or deny an application regardless of when it came in. So to use a disparaging term, they tend to know the slumlords in the area. They know the folks who are not above board actors, and put a lot more scrutiny if they even pay attention to those types of applications. Some of the examples that we've found where this has been a really helpful program for landlords who realize that our code non-compliance, Commissioner Hanford mentioned, for the mobile home program, but similarly in this failed furnaces, emergency situation, failed septic, obviously, this code non-compliance. Another big one is a landlord who's trying to do their due diligence, upgrading electrical, and realize, holy cow, this whole building still has knob and tube wiring. This project that was just a couple outlets and some faceplates suddenly is tens of $1,000s of completely revamping a building to make it safe and bring it up to current codes. So those are some of the examples. I mean, we are, this conversation belies the fact that we're always in a balancing act of making programs that are accessible to address immediate needs and the needs of those who are vulnerable, but not so accessible that we find out later that money was used to put in granite countertops and stainless steel appliances in an apartment that was otherwise viable, and is setting itself up for increasing rents. So what the state is buying with this program is a affordability level for at least 5 years up to 10 years, for these new units, and we're investing in bringing, addressing the needs of a lot of our aging stock that, as has been brought up, might have been in different use or had just been underinvested in, or there's a surprise issue. And it's a tenant program to help tenants, but it's also a program to invest in our aging housing stock. So, yeah.
Representative Krasnow, then Chestnut
Oh,
Tantrum.
I think Caleb was first, but, okay. Who decides who would get these funds, like, based on projects? I mean, like, sometimes there's programs that I like that folks are concerned about in the administration, other things, and I'm just curious, well, who does the oversight?
Yeah, so the selection is done at the regional homeownership centers, the nonprofits, CHT, Downstreet.
Okay.
They have but they do consult with us when they run into tough situations. We've had numerous consults with the group of, hey, looking at this property, does this seem like, because they want to make the right decision. They want to work with people. They want to give people a chance, but they run into situations that they have some questions on, and they come back and try to get information and guidance from us as well. I mean, we have legal counsel on staff, so there's been some help to try to address some of those concerns. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's accurate. So just for the sake of the committee, the 5 homeownership centers are Champlain Housing Trust in the Northwest, Rural Edge in the Northeast, Downstreet Housing and Community Development in Central Vermont, NeighborWorks of Western Vermont covers our West Coast, if you will, and then Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust is hopefully self-explanatory what counties they cover. So those are the 5. We have our department has standing bi-weekly meetings with the program managers of these groups. And then we've set up a long list of program parameters that are actually available on our website. I'm happy to share the link with Ron or Chair Stevens to share with the committee. Within those program parameters, there are always, you'd be amazed at the unique situations that are brought to our attention pretty much every week. There's something, even though we've been running a program in some similar fashion to this one for a number of years now, I am blown away by the creativity of some individuals about what they're interested in applying for and doing. So we have regular communication with program directors and actually also are meeting with executive directors of the homeownership centers shortly to discuss sort of the sustainability and longevity of this program. So there's I won't say constant, but some days it feels constant communication with all the homeownership centers about particular issues that might fall a little bit astray from the guardrails that we've put up. But ultimately, to answer your question, it is ultimately the homeownership centers in their region that make the final decision with some consultation with us.
That's great, because I really feel like they have a direct line to really see the needs and understanding. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Representative Elder, then James.
So this, the idea of using it for new units is interesting just because in our area we're seeing, I live in represent a rural area. We do have one designated downtown, but we're seeing we have a lot of older housing stocks, the whole state, and some of it is like these 4-bedroom places. And we've got issues with septic there as well, because you see people want to turn like a one single family house, 4-bedroom into a side-by-side duplex. And even if you have a 4-bedroom septic, you can't use it, so there's other things that exist there, but the creation of new units, I think I really like to see it, because sometimes we hear that renovation can be as expensive as new building, but when you're talking about renovating what was a residential house, yes, you might need to do some outsolation and some different ways of getting it up to energy performance. But you've got in some cases a good foundation, you've got good framing that's would be very expensive to replace, and so it is a way to get kind of new units for cheaper. Also, being capped at 5 units, I think, is helpful, and it ties into some other places I'd like to see this bill go. where we really, we've got other sections in the zoning sections where, for example, in certain downtown areas where you got water and sewer, we really prefer 4 units. And so I think there's this sort of category of building that's sort of, say, 4 units and smaller that I think some of our existing regulatory rules really hamstring, and the fact that, if you do what I described, take, say, 2 houses and turn them into 4 units, and then you want to do it to a third, you can't, with the 10-5-5 rule. And so that's some of the stuff that our companion committee in that Senate looked at, and that I love to see bring back up. And I think VHIP complements that in a nice way, because I think that it complements the notion that maybe we can create at the lower end of things, a kind of under 5 units, as preferred regulatory structure, acknowledging not the same potential to do rapid land use harm or environmental harm, but knowing that those small projects have thinner margins in some cases. And for VHIP funding to really work, we need to be strategic in the way that we pare down soft costs when the projects have a smaller footprint and a smaller regulatory ceiling to their impact. So anyway, just kind of a voice of support, at least in our area, for using VHIP money for that kind of purpose, both creating new units, which I think in most cases, to be able to do it that cost efficiently, we're probably talking about new units within an existing shell, within an existing structure. But, whether it's a designated downtown that's water and sewer, or you're doing something preferred because that town has permanent zoning, whichever way it is, I think there's some opportunity to release that capacity at the kind of lower scale of our building, which is hard to do, while hopefully not upsetting the apple cart in terms of land use risk mitigation. I think there's a path there.
And as you were mentioning that, I was thinking we have an agreement with the Agency of Natural Resources to access some of their healthy homes money when we run into a situation where a septic system needs to be replaced or a second one added. To do that, that can be $20,000-$30,000 these days.
Yeah.
And so that blows the VHIP max out of the water when you run into that situation. Or your well was tested positive for some sort of, now you need a new well, and so we have some funds available through DC, A&R DC, from their Healthy Homes pot to complement when we run into healthy drinking water and wastewater needs on some of these projects.
Representative James.
Thanks, Chair Stevens. Either to Josh or Sean. I really need to make sure I understand provision 1 that you were talking about, Josh, or suggested change number 1, which is clarifying the difference between a new ADU, new unit creation, and or repairing an existing unit. I want to make sure I'm really dialed in on how it is working now as the program is currently structured, and what we're suggesting changing and why. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, and I'm actually going to jump right to Sean for the
All right.
details. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. So right now, it's clear that unit rehabilitation in an existing unit is an allowable use. That's the easiest one. Splicing an existing building into units, so taking a large 8-bedroom and turning it into a duplex or triplex even is considered an allowable use. Accessory dwelling units, and I want to be clear that the definition of ADU actually is kind of in a weird spot in legislature. It's in Title 24, Section 4412, actually sub 1, sub E, and it talks about how a municipality is not allowed to prohibit an accessory dwelling unit, and that is where the definition actually lies. It's not in any definition section. So an ADU needs to be a unit that is subordinate to a single family owner occupied dwelling. So that's your mother-in-law apartment when the family lives on the lot. It's a rental unit when the owner is living there. It could be a converted garage on a single family lot, that sort of thing. If there's a duplex there or anything else, the additional unit is no longer considered an accessory dwelling unit in Vermont law. So that said, so we have rehab of existing rental units, creation of units within an existing structure, much like what Representative Elder just described, and creation of an accessory dwelling unit. that accessory dwelling unit could be, the way the statute is written right now, it could be a new structure. I could build, renovate a shed or build a new carriage house that I make as a rental unit in my backyard on my single family lot. But if I weren't living here, and I'm in my home right now, if I weren't living on the lot, then that is no longer considered an accessory dwelling unit. So if I owned a investment property that was a single family with a 2-acre lot, and I was considering putting an additional unit on that lot, that is not considered an accessory dwelling unit and would not be eligible for VHIP funding right now because it's a brand new structure. Some other things that we're running into is there have been a number of applications that have been made where the property owner has identified that the structure on the lot ought to be torn down, or it was more economic to tear it down and to rebuild as a multiple unit structure. That we can't do right now if it's not in exactly the same footprint. So what we're allowing with the new unit creation is if somebody wanted to create a new structure on a lot that already has some development on it, or wants to do a tear down and reorient the lot such that it could accommodate more units, that would be an allowable use of VHIP. And I do want to also add that there is, I don't think it's been brought up yet, there is a 20% match that's required. So it's not simply free money without any skin in the game. There is some matching requirement that the property owner needs to use. And we've seen that 20% is often exceeded considerably. I went on a couple different directions. Did that answer your question clear enough, Representative?
Yeah, I had one more question. I thought that the parameters in the ADU component were slightly different. So about who you could have as a tenant and what you could charge for rent, which in my mind sort of allowed the ADU loan or grant to be a little bit more flexible and maybe target a slightly different band of eligible Vermonters. And maybe I'm misunderstanding that. And are we considering changing that? And if so, why?
You are not misunderstanding that. The ADUs are treated slightly differently in terms of the prospective tenants. The rental rates are the same. It needs to be any unit touched by VHIP needs to be rented at or below the HUD fair market rent, full stop. However, if the unit that's being applied to, that VHIP is being applied to, is an accessory dwelling unit, that is the only rental requirement. In other cases, the unit needs to be utilized by somebody, households, so to speak, who is exiting homelessness, or somebody who is actively working with a refugee resettlement agency. So to put that another way, if the property owner lives on the property and is creating an ADU, they get to choose whomever they'd like to live in that property. If it is an investment property or treated like a rental that's not associated with owner occupancy, then they are required to make that further commitment to rent to particularly vulnerable individuals in those two populations. We're not looking to change any of those parameters.
Okay, great. That was actually the part I was concerned about, because I do think that if it's an owner occupied property, giving the property owner just that little bit more flexibility is a good idea. I think it would encourage more people to take advantage of the program. So, all right, thanks.
Representative Chestnut Tancher.
Question for Sean, following up the requirement that an ADU be on the lot of a single owner-occupied single-family residence. We can go all day on what ifs, but my particular what if is I know a lot of people starting out and trying to finance a first home will buy a duplex so that they have an income stream. It sounds like an ADU can't be an ADU if it's a owner-occupied duplex. Is that correct?
We can get into the weeds very quickly with this. It actually depends on the municipality, because there are some nuances. A municipality is allowed to make the ADU definition less restrictive than what the state has. They can't make it more restrictive. So there are a couple municipalities that allow up to 50% of the square footage of the structure to be considered an ADU, in which case that's by definition a duplex. Other municipalities limit the amount of square footage to down to 30% of the structure. So there are some nuances about that. So I think I won't name names of municipalities because I don't have the bylaws in front of me, but there are some where a duplex that is owner occupied and renting out the other half that other half could be considered an accessory dwelling unit, and other municipalities where it's required that unit be smaller than the owner occupied unit.
But if they wanted to, convert the space over the garage,
right,
that would not be an ADU. That would be because it's a duplex.
Because it's a duplex, correct? Yes. So if there's already a duplex on the lot, then by legal definition, there cannot be an accessory dwelling unit.
And that's what adding a new unit would allow us to do.
Right.
If it's a separate new unit that we're trying to address. And I would say that there was probably almost a week of discussion about this very thing in Senate Economic Development.
We're trying to compress that into 20 minutes.
Because some people wanted to just get rid of the ADU carve out and say, well, it's a duplex ADU, and that made some sense. But also the argument that we needed to better define ADUs in this bill because there isn't a definition that's clear to find. And there were situations coming out there where someone would go and ask fire safety, do we need a permit for the ADU? And they'd be like, no, because if you don't rent the ADU to the general public, you don't. It's part of your house. If you're getting a VHIP grant, you absolutely do, because the requirement is it's available to the public. So this whole section does a lot to make that clear so it's not confusing to the permitters, not confusing to the homeownership centers and the people applying for these funds, because that was confusing people a lot, because most people think of ADUs as a mother-in-law apartment. They're intending them for their own personal use and family members. They're not open to the public. You don't need a code. You don't need a permit. But as soon as it becomes an apartment rent to the general public, you do.
Representative Bounty Van Elden.
I want to apologize for the question because it's way out in left field. Now that I've been on this committee, I drive school bus and I'm noticing houses that are just sitting there. And, some of them, like 4 of them are, they look pretty good shape and they're not being, utilized. And, and I'm just thinking as a homeowner, let's say it takes $70,000 to bring it off the code and everything. And I could go through VHIP and I could put in $20,000 of myself. Do you folks or Rural Edge or anybody like go to the town and say, hey, you know what, these houses, they're just sitting here, who's the landlord? Can we contact them? Because a lot of landlords or people don't know that, this program exists. So
Proactively, no, I mean, I would say from the homeownership centers, they don't proactively search. They have more people that they can serve with this program than capacity and money. But I'm hoping that as we establish more of these by right building and zoning and being more permissive, that some local, business entrepreneurs take advantage and become small-time developers and look and find out who owns that house. There's new programs, there's new regulations that would allow me to do 3 or 4 units here and to address the critical housing needs. That's, I think, the hope. I think that we're sort of already talking about that now. If you allow some more permissive zoning and regulatory to promote more housing, and we have some of these small funding programs that are lower barrier than a 30-unit low-income housing tax credit project, we could see people doing just that. But it would be the other way around. They'd be approaching the homeownership center and saying, hey, we've got this deal. We think this is eligible. Can we apply? I think you're right. I think there's opportunities out there. I see it around my house, vacant homes that are in tough shape, but someday they're either going to fall to the ground or someone's going to find a way to scoop a couple of those up, make investments and turn them into nice single family homes again or rentals. And it's happening more than ever. I've seen a massive change in Randolph of vacant and abandoned homes all around downtown that now have all been fixed up. People are living in them because the market is just so scarce that, there's just not enough opportunity. So that's the flip side good side of having a very limited supply, but price pressures come with that and squeeze people on the bottom out. So.
Representative Elder, and then I don't know if there was anything else in S100 that you wanted to focus on. I just have a couple quick clarifications, but.
Yeah, just about the ADUs real quick. I do think it's a really important part of our statute. I also think it's poorly understood. And, I've got an unfortunate situation in one of my towns where an ADU was permitted that just never should have been permitted. It was permitted to go with a duplex. It's way too big. It's like, it's like nothing about it should have been approved, but the towns issued the permit and the thing's built. And so now what do you do? But that's its own issue, but that kind of issue could really become a problem, especially as we're trying to do some subsidy for ADUs. So I think getting the definition in the right place in the statute, getting the definition really clear and letting people understand, here's what this development tool is for. It's for people who live in a home, they don't want to lose it, but they want to create more space, either for rental or for a family member. What it's not for is to have a duplex, and because it sounds like a duplex, and so I think that it's this kind of cool, quirky part of our housing law that now I think we're wanting to lean into. And so I do hope that we really get the definitions as tight as we can, because I know in one of the communities I represent, it's this thing where people are saying, whoops, I guess we shouldn't have done that. But, once the thing's standing there in the ground, pretty tricky for everyone moving forward. And what I don't want is a backlash where people say, well, forget about it. We're done with it, because then some of those same people that see that are freaking about the provisions where they're not allowed to regulate ADUs more strictly than they do. And I mentioned this the other day. I really like ADU development, and I'm all for it. But I do think that it's a little less universal than I think people might think at first blush, in terms of, because there are some specific things about your homeownership situation that need to apply. And so, it's kind of something for people who file the homestead declaration in some ways, not entirely, but there's a lot of overlap there. And even that kind of understanding might be helpful for some people, that if it's an investment property, it's really not an option for you. And to just kind of know that going in.
And we have some technical tools coming out. We've contracted with a couple national vendors to give some toolkits and some designs and more education on ADUs. That was part of last year's VHIP. We were compelled to make some of the money available, not as grants, but as technical assistance. And we started with some promotion through 7 days. If folks saw ads, and because that was part of the legislation last year. And there's more coming out to help help people better understand what an ADU can do, what it can't be, and then help them through the process, because it can be confusing when you need permits, when you need architecture, when you need engineer, so there's more work in that space, because it's viewed as a type of missing middle housing design solution.
Just another clarification. The verification of status, that, the homestead declaration, that's done once at the time of the grant, right?
No, we have a income. We have a rental rate verification yearly through landlord certificate. Sean?
We do. So we have an annual a form that needs to be submitted annually for the units that gives us some information about the rental rates. However, I think what you're getting at is ADU definition, and you're correct. We check for ownership, owner occupancy at the time of the application, and would not necessarily have a great way to make sure that a homestead declaration continues to be issued on that property. And that I think that's a complication beyond VHIP. That's a complicated factor with accessory dwelling unit creation, full across the spectrum.
Right. That was the heart of the question. So
thank you for misunderstood. Yeah, they talked about that in Senate economic development, and goals of many people create ADUs without this program, and they have different goals in mind, whether they're short-term rentals. At least we know with the VHIP unit, ADU is serving someone full-time, low income. We can't control what's happening elsewhere. We can just incentivize people to maybe use this tool. But it gets tricky because it was brought up, even if you passed a law that required that, real estate agents, the transaction, no one would ever be able to enforce that unless you had some sort of, they couldn't even come up with a way to think about how to enforce that absent a tool like we have, which is a public investment that you can at least check.
So quickly, I hope, in section 40, the line here says a landlord shall not offer a unit created through the program as a short-term rental as defined forever, or for the length of the time that they have a covenant on the property.
Yeah, we can only enforce what we have is the terms of the VHIP program.
Right. I just want to be clear that that's what it's for, because the way it's written is if you accept this public money even after you're contracted, I mean, that's how it could be interpreted very quickly. And in terms of the word accessibility, like putting shared home providers and understanding the complexity there, because we did take testimony that said that shared home providers under the programs that we've heard about, they do not issue leases, so there is not a landlord-tenant relationship. So I get that for now. But if we were, as we expand this program, so for instance, it says forgivable, to provide competitive grants and forgivable loans to private landlords for the rehabilitation. And then sometime over the last several years, we've added comma, including weatherization, comma. And we know from our work on the rental registry that when you say including, it can be anything. It would be a determinant. So bringing it out was a gesture. It was a signal to people to say to landlords that weatherization is a possibility for this expenditure. If we wanted to add accessibility to that, we could just say including weatherization and accessibility. But we're getting, I think, to the point after two of those is you start doing the list of things. Mm-hmm. As opposed to saying it's to the discretion of, in this case, the nonprofit housing organization who are fulfilling those applications. Am I getting that? I mean, again, if I want a landlord to know, and this was one of the requests from the Disabilities Council, was to make VHIP available to landlords, to put language in the landlords section, which is this one, to make sure that they know that accessibility is a good option for this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we would have any concerns adding that as a use that we're suggesting you should consider VHIP for.
Right, and that's what this is. This is a suggestion as opposed to a mandated. This is part of it's a suggestion that's not a tight regulation that you talked about earlier today. Yes, right.
But that's similar to, I guess, better articulated than my earlier question, because I know what I'm thinking, but I was thinking some of that is that then when people are deciding who gets what money and why, if it's too vague, and I don't think it should be a requirement, I guess, would hope that people would take that into consideration, the certain needs over others versus, I don't know.
No, that's a great point. And I think that's what I was bringing up.
Yeah.
That, like, if you really wanted to make this an incentive and be,
right.
And my guess would be if the homeownership centers were looking at a number of VHIP applications and there was some that said, we're going to make this unit universally accessible as well, that competing against one that wasn't would probably be selected. But one way you could ensure more of those came to the table would be to give accessibility work in a VHIP unit an exemption from the match requirement. Then you would see applications that would say, we're going to do ADA work. We know it's needed. We're not required to, because the ADA sort of rules kick in when you're doing a number of units. I forget what they are, but it's typically above 8 or 9 units at a time. And so if we're doing one unit here, one unit there, which is really what a lot of our housing stock is, it's single family homes that are 2 or 3 apartments. It's not required, but if we wanted to incentivize it for many reasons, I think one way to do that would be exempt that ADA work from the match requirement. Now, I am not the homeownership center staff that has to sort through all that paperwork and has to verify, and you're adding a burden on them. But, it would be something, we have a lot of work to do with the homeownership centers, that we have weekly meetings. This program has been start, stop, change, start, stop, change. And so once we get into like, this is a program and this is how it'll be, I think there'll be much more support to even take that higher. And then because we fund ADA work at the apartment all the time, and how we get around it when we do municipal buildings, libraries, town halls and others, we ask for a third-party engineer to sign off that the ADA work was done correctly, because there's mistakes made. People don't often understand the code. That would be a pretty big burden.
Yeah,
So
I don't want.
I'm all with you. I don't know what the right answer is.
So, okay, so that's something we, I guess, can discuss.
Yep.
Thank you.
Kath?
Thanks. I just want to make sure I understand I guess the terms of the covenant. That was one more question I had. We talked about it a little bit earlier. So if you take VHIP money for any of these uses, ADU, creation of new or repair, then whether you take the 5-year or the 10-year deal, the restrictions about how you can rent the apartment and what you can charge for it stay on that unit for that term, right? 5 years or 10 years. And then the property owner is sort of released and they can do whatever they want to with the unit. I want to make sure I understand that piece of it.
Yes, I can elaborate. So, and at risk of complicating things a little bit, we're right now only allowing for the 5-year commitment with the homeless service provision for non-ADU units. And that's due to the fact that we're currently using ARPA funding and need to have a direct COVID nexus in order to use these funds. And people exiting homeless have been deemed categorically eligible for COVID relief funds. That said, what we're talking about in this new legislation with the incoming general funds that are proposed for the current budget, once we get to those funds, once we expend ARPA, there will be a 5-year option and a 10-year option. The 10-year option would not have the homeless requirement, but would be up that longer term. The covenant is filed with the town clerk on the land records. It is a lien on the property essentially. And so it's somebody who opts for the 5-year option, the sort of what we'd call the high bar, with affordable rents for 5 years and serving those vulnerable populations, refugees and homelessness. They're locked in for that 5 years, regardless of property sale. If the property gets refinanced, that covenant still stays on that property for the 5 years. Year 6, they're free and clear to do what they will with the property. With the 10-year option, the way that it's defined in the current proposal and actually in existing statute, the 10-year option is structured. It still has the covenant on the land records. It's structured as a forgivable loan. So if you go all the way through the 10 years, at the end of that 10 years, the loan is relieved and you're finished. However, we recognize that a 10-year period is quite a long ways, and most people only actually stay in a property for about 7. So there's actually a buyout option. That loan, that 10-year loan, gets forgiven at 10% every year that you're in the program. So if you get to for instance, year 7, and you decide, I really need to change the use, I need to get out of this, you can pay back the remaining 30% that's still there. So you get a 10% credit towards the loan every year that you're in the program. And if you want to pay it back, you can pay it back and we can recycle the money into another unit.
Yeah, and just to add, I think the public investment here versus the amount of money and the time period has always been a discussion point around this program. And I think that, we've right-sized the public investment versus the payback compared to what we traditionally prefer to serve the most vulnerable with a perpetually affordable unit. And, I'm on the VHFA board, CR projects. The applications that are coming in now are over $500,000 per unit. So this is a much smaller investment, less of an affordability commitment. And there were folks that were asking us actually in Senate appropriations, do you want to raise the amount? We would support several because there were several senators that are going through rental rehabilitation projects themselves of property they own, and they know how much it costs. $100,000, $200,000 to even renovate some of these. And our response was, I don't know if that's the right thing to do, because we were trying to strike this balance of public investment versus the return on affordability. And right now we seem to be getting interest at the lowest cost possible of any sort of housing production program in the state. There still seems to be strong interest. And so, let's keep going with this cap that we have now. Okay.
But either way, after the terms of the covenant are done, at the 5 years or 10 years, the property owner is, as you said, Sean, free and clear, and we're not recommending changing that.
Correct.
Representative Jesselyn Tangerman, and then I do want to get to Board Yang.
So yesterday we had testimony from Maura Collins about the revolving loan fund for new construction. And I'm just wondering, with VHIP covering new construction, is there a redundancy there? Are they doing the same, covering the same market? And the more redundancy there is, the more confusion there is generally if there aren't clear distinctions.
The only overlap I see is the income band from 65% AMI to 80% AMI. Because the HUD fair market rents are based on, so the majority of that missing middle RLF program is for incomes and tenants above where this program cuts off.
Okay. So it may be a narrow bit of overlap.
There may be a narrow bit of overlap. Even though we're allowing net unit creation, I don't think it's the same sort of development projects that program is focusing on.
Yeah, I would agree. The even with the net new unit, that's giving us, it sounds like a big change, and I recognize that. Realistically, I think on the ground, it's going to be a relatively small alteration to what the existing program is, which is primarily focusing on rehabilitation of existing structures. We're allowing a little bit more flexibility to improve the efficacy of that work. I don't foresee, nor do we want this program to become one of the additional programs in the mix with the other major development funders.
All right, anything else for right now?
Nope, just my initial opening that anything you want to talk about S100, been at the table at the beginning, really trying to play a partner from the administration of compromise, and what's good for all housing is good for us all. And I brought the piece, which will follow up, about the existing mobile home manufactured housing improvement repair program, how we've already met the demand. We're helping people like we've never had before. And we'd really like to get an allowance to switch some of that other money that's not being used yet to continue to help low-income members. Happy to talk to you about anything else on this.
And to be clear, we have not met the demand. We have exceeded the supply.
Right. We're not meeting the demand, but we could do a better job of it if we had flexibility.
Fair enough. We passed a bill to do the mobile home kind of a centralization of information. There is a version, a less described version of that, I think, in S100. Again, appreciate the incredible investment. They seem incredible. We know that it could be 10 times that and still not meet the needs. But to finally have the state recognizing that the mobile home parks need this kind of support is important. But we also want to find out, as Sean, I think you were in the conversation on 158 or 157, to just sort of get up to date and kind of bring all the information that you have, that other organizations have, so that we can really focus our policy work on with having updated data.
Yeah, one last thing I'd leave you with, because I started with, please, you do have jurisdiction in land use because that's where housing is built, in my opinion. There is a report that our department did 4, 5, 6 years ago called Act 157, which already looked into a lot of the things that are still being debated and asked for new reports about that talk about the cost savings of Act 250 if you can avoid it through a PHP, the 6 months, the tens of thousands of dollars and the impact of that and where that needs to be right sized. That was asked for by this committee, House Commerce, and the House and the Senate Economic Development Committee 5, 6 years ago, that has a sampling of data and some case studies. And so as your other shared jurisdiction on this debates that, I hope that that comes to light, that this is not new territory. There's been study after study that have recognized that there's added costs and delays that we're choosing to remain in place despite a severe housing crisis. So,
Representative Bartley.
Would we be able to have somebody come in and testify on that report?
Yeah, well, we can certainly, first of all, take it up,
Okay.
dust it off and share it with everybody. And then it may not be in context of this bill this week, this coming week, but definitely, because we have to build a relationship with reports and to understand that if we ask for the information, what will we do with it? And then did it age or age well, especially through the pandemic where, everything changed. Well, not everything changed. And we can parse by going
The
through
committee now.
All right, Representative Elder, did you have do you want to finish the day on this?
Oh, I just hope that we can circle back about the mobile home projects. We added $10 million to the budget, which of course is still in process, but with the idea that there's maybe these 250 empty mobile home pads that could be populated with replacement homes. And so that was I think that was a concept that didn't receive a ton of, I think it's fair to say just a ton of testimony because it kind of came together fairly quickly, but it's one that I'm interested in and would be interested in the future to know how it connects to.
Yeah, I'd be happy because I think that is a place that we were all caught off guard. The numbers in there, the cost, the use is not something that we were consulted on. And I think there's a fair amount of concern of what the goals there are.
Yeah, but I do think it would be good to ascertain, is there a good program that could be deployed for those pads that are empty? Because, it is a relatively cost efficient way to have the family.
Exactly.
And it adds, well, and but it does I'm not gonna say anything that has the word complexity in it. So I can get to Bohr and we can talk about this at a different time.
Happy. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. We're gonna go right to Bohr. I'm not gonna take a break. We're going, because we're gonna finish at 1:00. And, Bohr, welcome back. I feel like this is gonna be the Bohr Yang week. Here in committee as available. Or there was a section in S100 that was passed through the committee and yet was cut from this bill. And I'm not sure, I know it was discussed about being added to the budget. I believe you were requesting $100,000. And I just wanted to get an update from you on the status of the request. Again, if we have to put language in for policy, then we will strongly consider it. But I do think that I want to know, I just don't want to think that the money was included. So if you could provide us with an update on the request and what it was for, that would be very helpful to us in our consideration of this bill.
Thank you so much. Bohr Yang, Executive Director of the Vermont Human Rights Commission. And I think there's actually two sections of this bill, one that was deleted and one that remains that I want to talk about. And but I'll talk about the litigator position first. So when this bill was initially introduced, there was language in the bill that wanted the HRC, the Human Rights Commission, to be able to refer cases to other state agencies. And our testimony was that the legislature had picked the Human Rights Commission more than 30 years ago to do this type of work. The Human Rights Commission in many ways is insulated and independent, and it makes sense for the Human Rights Commission to have the right resources in order to do that work, rather than allowing it sort of this path to refer to other agencies to do the work that really has been assigned to it to do. And so the Senate Committee on Economics had added a section in the bill, it was section 27, that would add a full-time litigator to the Human Rights Commission. And the request was for $150,000 because obviously you want to hire someone who's experienced. And $150,000 is actually conservative because it's salary plus benefits. You always have to account for, you know, families potentially. And the benefits of that, and that can be pretty, costly to a budget. But I understand that the Senate Committee on Appropriations had removed it, and I missed the conversation as to why that was. I do know that the budget bill, which was passed by the House, does include a staff attorney position. I'm testifying in Senate Appropriations later this afternoon. I don't know if when the Senate Appropriations Committee removed Section 27, which added a litigator, they knew that the House was adding a staff attorney or not. But I will figure that out this afternoon. So I am sorry, I'm not kind of prepared as to why they did that. I do think if you support it, it makes sense to have language in this bill that designates a full-time litigator at the Human Rights Commission, and let the appropriations bill provide the money for that, but that there be a separate bill such as this one that clarifies that you see the importance of adding a litigator position. The Human Rights Commission has never had a full-time litigator. That role, in part, has been the role of the executive director, who's also the supervisor, manager, policy director, training, educator person. And that's unfortunately something that we tend to do with entities like the Human Rights Commission, is we force them to wear many, many hats. And it's really hard then to bring cases to court if we are unable to, it's really hard to find discrimination and then make a decision that we cannot bring them to court and have our courts test them out. So I think it's time and it's appropriate to ensure that an enforcement entity would have a full-time litigator. And I just would ask that you maybe add Section 27 back to it. But I certainly can update you after my testimony in Senate Appropriations this afternoon as to what their thoughts were around that and why they had removed it, or if they had always planned to put that in the budget bill and if that's good enough.
There's just very quickly what we know about the way the Senate works, which isn't much, is that when they have a policy and wrapped with an appropriation like this, that it is stripped from the bill. It's not personal. It's just anything because I think they're waiting for our budget to go across. It certainly gives an indication and puts it in paper at some level that's what the committee wanted. And you're right. I think from here on out, it's just a question of like, they'll see this bill. Will they have passed their, all those things that go on at this time of year. It is a question of not getting lost, which I think is to speak to why it would be important to put the policy language in here so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle here at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't take it personally. I would just fight like hell for it in the Senate. So
yeah.
A question from Representative Chestnut Tangerman.
Thank you. Just clarifying questions. Do you know the amount that was in the House budget? Was it 150? Was it the same amount?
I asked for 150. I have to double check the numbers, but I believe it was. Yes.
Okay. And we've used the term staff attorney and full-time litigator. Are those interchangeable?
So that's a great question. Staff attorney and litigator should be interchangeable. For whatever reason, the budget bill that passed in the House says staff attorney too. And that would be problematic. So this afternoon, I am testifying in the Senate Appropriations Committee to remove the 2 from it. Because how each agency designates what their lawyers do is slightly different. At the Human Rights Commission, a staff attorney 2 does not litigate. And so I would just have it be generic, like staff attorney, and have the HRC sort of hire as it sees fit for the various roles. But yeah, the 2 designation is problematic in the budget bill, but staff attorney or litigator is interchangeable.
Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you. So there's second area of another area of the bill that you would like to comment on?
Yeah, Section 28 amends the 9 VSA 4507, which creates a criminal penalty. I'm sorry. It says that a person who violates a provision of this chapter shall be fined not more than originally $1,000. The amendment would make it $10,000 per violation. And I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of background on this section. So technically, someone who violates the Fair Housing Act could be criminally penalized. As far as I know, that has never happened. Part of it is that the entity that has the jurisdiction to enforce the Fair Housing Act is the Human Rights Commission. And we have a statute that governs our role and responsibility, which is to bring a civil action. We are not a prosecutor, so we cannot enforce criminal penalties or seek criminal penalties. And so it's unless there's a state attorney who is aware of like a fair housing violation that violates a crime, and I'm not aware that they ever have done that, is that they would have to be the one to prosecute a criminal case and seek criminal penalties in this sense. But we don't have that authority. And so this part of the law has traditionally just been, it's sort of, nobody has really enforced it. So I see here that there's been a request or an amendment to make it $10,000 per violation, but I'm not sure that that's going to make a significant difference. Currently, a court can award a civil penalty of up to $10,000 per violation anyways, and that's the statute, or that's the part of the statute that the Human Rights Commission uses to enforce the fair housing laws. But like I said, we don't have authority to seek a criminal penalty. So I just think it's funky and it's interesting. I don't know if it's going to make a difference because nobody is really using this.
And the information that we got from our council was that the number was done to align with the civil penalty, but
Okay.
when we asked, like, are there criminal actions listed in the act, and the answer was, to the best of their knowledge, no.
Right.
And so this idea, I mean, you said technically they could be a criminal, and our legislative counsel was like, not sure what that would be, because there's nothing that's listed as criminal. So anyway, it seems like it's I don't want to give it a pejorative name, but it is curious. I think we'll take a look at it and see if it's necessary.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
All right. Anything else for board right now? No. Okay. Thank you. And thank you for sitting online until we got to you. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you all very much for your time.
Have a
Appreciate
good
it and
week.
support. Take care.
All right. Committee, now we'll take a 10-minute break. And then we'll have Rachel's here